I'm a consultant and journalism trainer, and I work regularly with WAN-IFRA, and I help newsrooms innovate digitally in sustainable and affordable ways, whether that's starting a podcast or launching a TikTok channel or branching into social video, or perhaps thinking about how you can get more return on investment from social media. So I focus a lot on strategy because successful innovation doesn't mean chasing after the next big shiny thing. When we do something new, it has to grow audiences and support our business priorities. So with that in mind, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Nitin Chandalia, who's a partner at Boston Consulting Group in India. Nitin joined BCG nearly 10 years ago, and he works with clients from technology and media on growth, go-to-market, delivery cost transformation, and organizational redesign. He's led multiple transformation programs to drive revenue acceleration and margin improvement. And his current focus is on helping clients transform their offering portfolios and go-to-market strategy, and to streamline processes around automation and advanced analytics, and to improve operational effectiveness through the people supply chain. And he's currently focused on working with clients on transforming their offering portfolio. And sorry, I've just realized I've read the last line of my intro. So without further ado, I'm really excited to hear from Nitin Chandalia and all about adapting to the new normal. Please go ahead, Nitin.
Sure. Thank you, Corinne. And good afternoon, everyone. And that was a very good introduction and a detailed one. Thanks, Corinne. I have a short presentation that I wanted to run through as we start this discussion. The way we've structured this is to go through the discussion for about 10-15 minutes for me to run through a few slides. Being consultants, that's what we do. And then we'll open the floor for questions on any thoughts that you may have. Right. So with that, bringing this up, from a topics standpoint, when we call adapting to the new normal and what's next for news publishers, if I'm very honest, adapting to the new normal as a session or a discussion, I've been part of many of these now, across industries, across, I would say topics. Many of the things that we've talked about in terms of adapting to the new normals have been about the working model. How do you think about getting employees back? Which part of the organization should be in office for how long? Is it continuous? Is it back to the pre-2020 kind of a time frame, or is it a very different operating model? The other is, as you look at go-to-market, how media is getting consumed, audience, consumer behaviors. Have we moved to a completely new steady state normal now, post the shifts brought in during the pandemic, and so on. And as I looked at this topic specifically for news publishers, I thought given the context, we'll talk about a few trends that we are seeing specifically in India as far as news consumption is concerned. And while the topic was about publishers, and I know the orientation of this group is more towards publishing, but I thought it will not do justice if we don't talk about the consumption across different mediums. So you will see some of the comparisons and numbers across publishers, radio, which is pretty much only one channel per se, and then broadcasting and digital publishers, and what we are seeing in the market from a consumption perspective. So if I look at what are the set of things that are driving or will shape the future of news ecosystem. Obviously, the first and foremost, we've been seeing this, which is a changing consumption pattern on news, which has obviously led to a shift in ad dollars. Print revenues from ads had been declining. COVID almost came as a shock. However, while we continue to see growth on digital and sort of print losing ground, we've seen quite a bit of resilience and surprisingly positive resilience starting off last quarter of last year, so Q4 2020. The print revenues on the advertising side coming back, pretty much in the range of pre-pandemic for some of the players. And I think one of the things that has happened is it's as we talk more about it, it has widened the divide in terms of large players versus smaller. So I think for print advertising revenues, while those are back, long-term trend still continues to be on the declining side. We'll look at some of the examples for US and India. I think so. That's the first part, driving towards digital, and the shift in consumption is leading to a lot of changes that we're talking about. The news ecosystem is hence evolving. Most of the players now have multi-format news channels in terms of print, digital, broadcasting, and other formats. The technology underlying media and news publishing and news distribution has seen a lot of change. Especially as we look at from an audience standpoint, personalization is one big part, and how does one target customers, and some adjacent opportunities that are beginning to appear, which are not really in the core news consumption business, but examples being fact check, that not the news, some of the newspaper or news publishing players have forayed into, both as a measure to build credibility or underscore credibility, but also as an alternate, albeit a small but alternate revenue stream, right? So those are the 4 points I wanted to talk to you about. As we get to the Q&A, there could be other areas that we touch upon, right? Just in terms of data, if you look at consumption of news between online, TV, and print has pretty much declined significantly across markets. This is based on a Reuters Institute report, which was published early 2021. Interestingly, in India, print continues to be a relevant and important medium for consumption of news. We had also done a survey, across a bunch of, across a set of cities, and consumers. I think India is pretty much a two-medium kind of a market. Most people continue to use print in some form, though declining. We have not seen the same cliff, and it's come back quickly after COVID, right? That said, if you look at broadcasting side, while the print side revenues are declining, broadcasting revenues are actually going up on the news side. Even in North America and in India, right? And if you look at digital news, from an engagement perspective, the MAUs, those have been growing significantly as far as news is concerned. And very interestingly, in India, we do see news as being one of the keys, one of the high interest categories for which people spend time online. COVID obviously led to a very high engagement in the news category, but which came down post-COVID, but has pretty much stabilized at a 200 million minutes kind of a mark after that. And before coming to publishing, if you were to look at what some of the broadcasters have been able to do in terms of driving their reach, these are some examples, not to say these are the best, I mean, just representative. If I were to look at four platforms in India on news content consumption, the MAUs for unique visitors for each of these have grown significantly. You see in India today going 2.3 times, and digital sort of almost from nowhere into 2018 to 2021 being sort of 57 million. So across networks, across the types of formats, people have realized that digital is most important and is going to drive consumption of news. A bit of a busy chart, but if I look at this globally now, on the context that we're talking about, across the different players on the value chain, from news creation to audience engagement, monetization, and one looks at what the consumption formats are. There are different players, and many of these are actually legacy wise were video first, print first, or audio, but they have all expanded into formats which are now multi-format to be able to serve the needs of different audiences or the needs of the same audience at different points in time, right? So a combination of newsletters, a combination of obviously digital text news, in the multimedia format, a lot of news being available on social media, videos, experimenting with the very format of how news has been produced in the past as to what a good news clip looks like. There have been many experiments around bringing that time period of a news clip down and making it more relevant and more engaging for customers, so for the audience. So those are some of the changes that we are seeing. Consumption moving to digital for, in the text format and now on video is actually driving up the opportunities for revenue generation as well in different formats. If you look at our own context across in India, with some of the names, and we've seen the traditional newspapers, radios, news broadcasters, and so on. But the two segments that I want to call out, obviously, is if you look at the large tech platforms like a Google, Facebook, they are actually the biggest source of news in many forms, as any audience or any user is looking for a certain or searching for a certain news item or certain event that has happened, right? That's where you see that Google News Showcase or Google News, Facebook coming in through Facebook Watch and others on things getting shared and so on. We don't have Microsoft here, but Microsoft News also is a fairly large player. So the platforms are becoming the gateway to a consumption, and the role of these platforms is only likely to get bigger based on what we are seeing. Right? There have been digital pure plays which had created a set of niche for themselves, smaller, focused set of offerings targeted towards a kind of audience. Then you have the aggregators like the InShots and Daily Hunt, both of which have seen significant growth. Daily Hunt a lot more than InShot, but in terms of MAU as well as revenues that they've been able to get. But net, as one looks at different segments, different starting points, ultimately it's about getting to digital and using the digital channels most effectively. No surprises, but when we looked at these numbers of what is the most visited digital properties, 7 of top 20 are actually news publishers. So news is an important topic of interest for all digital users in India. We talked about this a little bit. If you look at how much Daily Hunt, which is essentially a news aggregator website, been able to grow their unique visitor count. It's nobody would have thought that an offering like this was possible and there was a need for it, and now they're pretty much carrying content from each of the publishers, and at a place where their MAUs are upwards of 150 million. Right? Now, what does this mean? I think it's a lot of market context, but what does all of this mean as far as newsprint publishers are concerned or publishers are concerned? And I think there are two different aspects of it that I wanted to touch upon. One, as one looks at newsroom of the future, there are a set of things which are going to be different, or we are increasingly seeing being different. Personalization is something that is actually being worked upon. So if you talk to Microsoft or a Google, the kind of news or what news will I see on a homepage will be very different from somebody else sees, and the whole idea is to drive up engagement and hence drive the revenues from there. Product development, multimedia, innovation. I think these are areas which actually look at how different newsrooms are thinking about creating news content, which is available and more easier for people to consume, share, and come back for more. Right. An example of this is InShots, right? Who identified the need for having news in small bits and bytes, where people are only looking at a certain summary and a set of key points around any news development, and that was a big market that they were able to uncover, right? On the video side, we're seeing a lot of innovation around how to actually shoot videos around news, which could be a 15-20 second video with just the right amount of content and information that people will find meaningful, right? We've seen branded content which has been one of the gray sort of, gray areas or gray lines in terms of how does one maintain editorial independence while sort of also seeing what can be done from a branded or sponsored content side. I think that part is sort of starting to evolve in different forms, in terms of funded research, sponsored, I would say editorial content where a project is sponsored, but then, this editorial independence and integrity is sort of maintained, and so on. So different models of creating new detailed, research oriented content. Because of digital, obviously newsrooms now are 24/7. So how does one actually run that, to drive up, continue to have an engaged audience, and so on. The key or the crux of all of this is to have, to be able to, attract the right kind of digital savvy talent from a newsroom perspective. So, while you need the journalism skill set, one also needs a lot of the new digital kind of skill sets, and an innovative mindset. So, as we are thinking about or working with clients on how do they think about the talent that they're hiring, one of the key things that I'm hearing is, we want to look at the journalists, who will come on board, have obviously a good depth on journalism, but also are very savvy around how do you actually write a piece of news which can then be, posted on different social media, which will then drive traction, analytics underlying that to, identify a set of drivers which can actually lead to a news item, for example, becoming viral, and so on. So that talent part is, is becoming extremely important. And that's on the newsroom. I think if I were to, look at, to summarize, and this is last slide and we'll open for questions, is one, whether it's the publishers, or obviously broadcasters, video is becoming a big form of news consumption. So I think most publishers that we have seen are creating a video offering, especially to come to digital for digital consumption, right? Multi-format content, again, becoming extremely important. The text, photo, obviously, which has been how print has communicated to the audience, is important. But as one looks at digital, how do you actually embed different kinds of picture? The way you look at creating a picture plus text kind of article in print is very different from how you create this for reading on digital, and the same thing, how do you post it on a Twitter or Facebook, is very different, right? Fact-checking services, a new set of revenue streams. So, how do you actually use this to build credibility with the audience, as well as, build this capability to serve some of the other platforms, digital platforms, and so on. Branded and native content we've talked about. And finally, most publishers are actually sitting on, I would say a very valuable archive of photos, dating back to, depending on the history, let's say about 50, 70, 80 years. And is there a way to monetize some of that content? So, you have a very, let's say, iconic picture of a national leader standing in front of India Gate, as an example, and that could have a certain meaning and value for somebody. So that rather than having a very traditional archive-based, subscription-based offering, is there, one of the things that we are seeing is NFT-driven monetization models coming into this. So with that, I think, I'll just take a pause. Have talked about various ideas. I don't think we can pretty much, crystal ball gaze what will happen in the new normal, but hopefully this has enough thoughts for you to think about.
Thanks so much, Nitin. That's brilliant. So interesting. That's the first time I've seen a potential use case within journalism for NFTs. So well done. Really interesting. Okay, so the past couple of years have been anything but normal. And I was wondering if we could start off by looking at whether the situation now could be described as a new normal. But before you do that, I want to just encourage people who are on the call listening to you to please use the live Q&A chat in the Events Air platform, and just make sure that you drop a question in there. I'll put as many as I can see to Mr. Chandalia, in this session, and we have about 20 minutes. So there's plenty of time, so jump in there. So how normal is what we're seeing right now? Can we talk about a new normal?
Yeah, so, with what's happening from a geopolitical perspective, not accounted for, that could lead to a very different kind of, normal, or when we get over that. I think from what we are seeing, and I will talk about most, how we are seeing consumer behavior, how we are seeing businesses coming back. I think we are getting to a place where most employees are coming back to offices. We haven't yet come back to the 100% in office, all the days. We'll have some sort of a hybrid model. So from one side, I think we are, if you look at the travel in India, traffic on the roads is pretty much back to what it used to be pre-COVID, right? So we are pretty much, getting back to normal. In terms of spending habits of consumers, I think we are getting to the period, back to the period where shopping centers, malls are seeing footfalls which are almost equivalent to pre-COVID, right? And the reason I'm talking about that is, in many ways that drives, how the consumption and where is the time for people to consume media, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Time spent on, media, on digital media, I think had increased significantly, had gone up significantly, during the COVID period, has come down somewhat, but it is still higher than pre-COVID, right? And we expect that the consumption of digital, media content will continue to remain at the levels that we are. India already has a significant percentage of population which has access to digital. That number is likely to get, as high as 700 to 800 million in 5 years. That's
okay.
Phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
So I think we are in this new normal. I wouldn't say it is very different from where we were earlier, but some habits have changed, and the habits that we have formed in the last 2 years around consumption will possibly continue as far as digital consumption is concerned.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming up, so I wanted to just ask a follow-up question from that before going to the questions that are starting to come in from the participants. What do you think will still be the case with regard to the changes and trends that you're seeing in the Indian media landscape, let's say 12 to 18 months from now? I know you said you didn't want to have a crystal ball, but the sorts of things that editors and managers can say, I can definitely plan for that, or I could be in a responsive mode to that.
So two things I'll talk about. One, obviously, we'll see a lot of convergence in the editorial, ecosystem, in terms of we will need to think about, for one particular story, what's the text and multimedia format of that I put up on the website. What's the Twitter version of that? What's the Facebook version of that? What's the what's the video version of that I put out, right? And that's where most newsrooms will move to a multi-format kind of a place when we have convergence, where you would like to see, especially from a digital perspective, which of your audience is engaging on what kind of content, which format. I think so. The investments in data and analytics, helping with personalization is something that we can definitely invest in if you are not already, because that's the way it's to move forward.
Okay. So preparing for multimedia, or more multimedia, multi-platform production.
And personalization, and what I would call is convergence, which is different formats, will converge. So whether you think about one person putting a story, which is both text, print, as well as video, or at some place this converges, right? So convergence is going to be big. The other element of this is the investments in analytics and personalization that I talked about, because that is what is going to drive the engagement and hence revenue potential. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I see some of the questions in the chat. Should I pick it up?
Yes.
Or?
Oh no, there's quite a few. So yeah, maybe if we shorten answers and then we can get through all of them, because there's some really great questions there. So the first one is, what's your advice on the future of workplace for media companies moving from work from home to hybrid. You did say that, we might not see a complete return to offices. So, and what would determine which format to follow? So let's deal with that one first.
I think when I talk about media in general, my sense is, or our sense as BCG is that we will all move to hybrid. The 100% in office is possibly a thing of the past, at least for the next couple of years to come. What we are seeing, at least for the profession of journalism, actually it's a great thing, because then you have that much more time to drive coverage, being wherever you are. What this will need, however, is an investment in technology infrastructure, so that you make it easier for the journalists to be able to work from anywhere, be able to submit a story, submit a video, and from a skill set perspective, to equip them with, for example, the ability to do edits on videos on their own, so that it doesn't come back to a central desk, and to create some bit of a formatting on their own if something has to be put on Twitter and so on. So it'll get a lot more decentralized, and will likely be in the hybrid mode overall.
Okay. Pradeep has asked, what's your view on the opportunity for subscriptions? I know quite a lot of Indian media outlets have introduced subscriptions, but let's think about the ones that perhaps are still ready to jump over that fence, and e-commerce for news publishers in India.
Yeah, two very different questions. I think on subscriptions, whatever we have seen, the experience in India has been mixed. In terms of people's ability to, or willingness to pay, I think there is widely spread notion that news should be free. I'm, okay and open to pay for analysis and in-depth content. That said, and we've all seen the examples of again, which is being able to build a reasonable, but it's a very small subscriber base. And it's taken a lot of doing, right? A lot of that has come from corporate, very different kind of story. So there is market for subscription, but for very niche, targeted, in-depth content. At least from the perspective of what we have seen so far, with the eyes of for those who had gone into subscription, it's not a natural place for people to converge. Especially on the print side, right? That we are seeing. I mean, for print news consumption. If I come to e-commerce, it's a very wide, so just in terms of the question, are we saying news publishers should start to become e-commerce players, or is there a play for a news company to start into, e-commerce? There are different formats. I don't see, it's pretty much like it's a new business to get into if one looks at it as an e-commerce. But there are ways in which, if there is engagement on the website, can one create, a specialist, let's say a property, for example, on D2C brands, because you have people coming onto your websites, there are D2C brand, you can have a D2C section, and through that one can become an aggregator of orders, or can become a marketplace for people to sell. But it's I would say a few steps removed from what the core competency is. So I don't see that as a natural extension.
It's interesting, just on e-commerce, I think it was WAN-IFRA digital Asian media leaders, perhaps, or one of the Asian conferences that WAN-IFRA ran about 18 months ago, I think. And one of the take homes from that conference was that a large number of participants wanted to launch e-commerce in the next 12 months, but felt that they didn't have the capacity, the capability to do so. And I want to come back to a slide, just towards the end of your deck, where you were talking about new capabilities that outlets need to thrive. And I think some of those things sit within the remit of traditional skills within journalism. For example, produce more video. You can hire people that I think there's a recognition of the kind of skill sets that you need to hire. But then there are skill sets that are very separate from journalism, like artificial intelligence, product development, branded content, AI is another one. So from the perspective of someone that's working for a large consultancy, where you're constantly having to advise organizations on how do you build capacity, what approaches can media outlets take in this regard?
Yeah, So I think a very important question. But first, in terms of talent that you have to hire or talent that you have to build, I think the first question has to be, what's my strategy and which market do I want to target, right? As far as media is concerned, in the business of uh, creating content, driving engagement, increasing the number of people that actually read or access your content, right? Given the consumption is moving to digital, there is significant investment required in digital capabilities, which is analytics, AI, and sort of core digital social media. Those are the kind of skill sets which one can actually hire from the market. It is not something that it's not difficult to find. It may be a bit expensive, especially in the current context, but that talent can always be hired. But if I were to look at e-commerce, I think that's more about a strategy question, saying, do I want to launch an e-commerce business? If you need to launch an e-commerce business, then it's a very different kind of skill set. It's that one needs.
I might just interrupt you there for a second, though, because I think in order to hire, you need to know what skill sets you're hiring for. So for the people attending this conference, where the skill sets that they're hiring for may be quite outside their, their normal day-to-day lives, how would you advise them to go about building the ability to hire the right skill sets?
That's a good point. So if one were to look at, if I take digital engagement as an example, right? If I take, print, a newspaper as a product, a product manager for a print used to be, let's say the editor-in-chief, right? Who's looking at what's the ad-edit ratio, what's the layout, and you had the marketing team actually providing inputs into what drives engagement and so on. You need an equivalent role for digital, as an example, right? And you need an equivalent setup on the marketing side where you get feedback on saying, okay, here is what drives engagement on a website, here is what drives engagement on social media. It could be the same editor-in-chief, but we need somebody complementing that kind of a role, because just the experience on digital that is needed. And what typically we have called that kind of a role is a product manager, because somebody who can work with the chief editor and work with the sole KPI of saying, I need to increase my monthly active users, right? So that's a skill set that you need, somebody who's at the cusp of, who can talk the language of journalism, who can talk the language of tech and marketing, and at the middle of that to create the right product for customers. And some others, but I think that's the first core role that we all need.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that certainly the News Product Alliance, which was launched in the United States about 18 months ago, is having a very active conversation in America about the need to hire product managers, actually. And I think you've really nailed it, is that's perhaps the hire to make this year. Even if you're a small media organization, you can stretch to that. There's a question from Aravinda, which is really, I think, also addresses this challenge that in print, one of the challenges is bridging the gap between senior resources, and let's say senior staff, perhaps managers, editors, and newcomers with regard to thinking around digital patterns, technology, etc. So it's really, I guess, bridging gaps within newsrooms between, the senior and perhaps the I don't want to say the younger generation, but let's say the digitally savvy generation. What's an approach that can help?
It's a classic, in some form, change management kind of a question, right? I think what we have talked about, what we've typically seen, and in newsrooms, it's a combination of three things. If I were to call it out, one, can we actually identify a set of measurable metrics? And we don't need to sort of link it back to individuals' performance management or bonuses, etc. But saying, look, this is important for digital, and make people aware, how they stand on those metrics, right? For example, as being a journalist now, there's a lot more about being an individual influencer as well on social media. How many of our folks in the newsroom are actually able to do that, and then providing them the right set of training, coaching to up their brand. So that's the one part. I think second, infusing some new talent from digital first kind of organizations on the news side, just in terms of learning from a peer set, while being on the floor, while being together, I think is the other important element of this. And third, I would say broad-based, set of workshops, trainings, investments that many of the larger platforms are actually making. Twitter is very happy to come in and do workshops around what actually drives engagement on Twitter, and likewise for a Facebook, Meta, or Google, sort of with I would say, obviously with a bit of caution, but listening into all of those and seeing what's relevant for us, and can we actually change some of the practices that we have. I think if we are able to do these three things, it will take some time, but and I've seen some senior journalists actually take to Twitter like a fish to water, right? In terms of just the engagement that they are able to drive with people commenting, the ability to actually put a point of view out there very quickly, not really have to wait for the newspaper to be published, as an example. Right?
Splendid, excellent. I think we're going to have to wrap up this session now. So I'm just going to thank Nitin Chandalia so much for your time. We've been listening to Nitin Chandalia, partner at Boston Consulting Group in India. And folks, please head back to the main timeline where you can see the next session. It's a panel discussion with chief execs from the Quint, NDTV and Vikatan Group, and they'll be talking about digital revenue and strategic focus in 2022. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Thank you so much. And
thanks,
really
Nitin.
appreciate the opportunity. Good